Welcome back to the Literary Lori YouTube channel. I'm Literary Lori, and in today's video, we're talking about reading reparations. What are they? Who should be making them? And is there money involved? Let's get into it. All right, if you are new here, I'm so happy you stopped by. My name is Lori L. Tharps, and I'm a traditionally published author of both nonfiction and fiction. I'm also a former tenured college professor who walked away from her academic job to move to the south of Spain so I could relaunch my career as a full-time novelist of book club fiction. Normally on this channel, I share writing tips and advice gleaned from my over 20 years of being a journalist, a writing coach, and a writing professor. But today's video is for the readers. Now, obviously, most writers are readers, so stick around if you are a writer first. But I really hope that everybody who identifies as a reader is also listening in, because this concept of reading reparations is something that I hope all readers pay attention to and consider, because I think it's a concept that could really make a difference in the publishing industry and the world at large. And I mean, really, who doesn't want to make the world a better place? So let's get started. All right, so I want to basically tell you guys what the concept of reading reparations is. I want to talk to you about how you might incorporate this concept into your own reading practice. And again, some of the changes that could come about if a large group of people actually adopted this concept, what kind of changes we could see in the world. All right, so let's begin with just the basic understanding of what reading reparations are. What does it even mean? So the definition of reparations, let's just start there, because a lot of people, when you hear the word reparations, you're thinking big picture, like reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, or reparations for the Jews in Germany after World War II, or reparations which were actually paid out to the Japanese Americans who were put in internment camps in the United States during World War II. All of those ideas of reparations really, again, speak to governments for major wrongs. But I want to read to you the actual definition of reparations so that we can see that reparations also can be thought of as something that an individual does. So the true definition of reparations, and I'm going to read here, is, quote, the action of making amends for a wrong one has done by providing payment or other assistance to those who have been wronged, unquote. All right. So keywords there are making amends for a wrong one has done, right? Not making amends that a government has done, but a singular one. And the idea is you have to provide payment or other assistance to the wronged. Now, this is actually used in the criminal justice system. Sometimes a criminal has to make reparations to the victim of the crime they committed. So there is precedent for singular people making reparations, and that's what we're talking about here. So what then do reading reparations look like, and what does that mean? I'm going to start out by sharing my own personal experience and then extrapolating and sharing how that can then be used for you, my fellow readers. All right, so I decided personally that I had to make reading reparations because for the first 25 plus years of my life, I was reading white. Yes, I was reading white. It's exactly what it sounds like. Yes. Okay. So everything I read was white. From the time I could read, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. From the time I could read up until I was in my mid-20s, the majority of the books that I consumed were by white authors. This was no fault of my own. This was what was available growing up in Wisconsin. These are the books my parents got for me. These were the books that were on the shelves of my school library, of my local library in Wisconsin. When I made it to college, the majority of books on the syllabus were by white authors, and little old me didn't know any better. I was a voracious reader, so anything that I did like, any series, any book, any author that I liked, that was me who would read every single thing that they wrote. So my reading habits for the first part of my life were they were greedy. I was a greedy reader. Let me just put it that way. So the amount of books by white authors that I read, was excessive. And so that is the first part of my life, and that is where the wrong was done. When I think about the wrong that was done, a lot of times when we think about reparations, we think about the harm has been done by one person to another person. But essentially, I did it to myself. It wasn't intentional, but what the harm that was done to me is that I really shaped my understanding of the world, of good literature, based on a skewed view of the sources of my knowledge. So here I am reading at a young age, forming myself, like making the foundations of my belief system by white authors. So the harm that was done to me was that I believed negative things about my own self, about my own culture. There were wide gaps of knowledge in my understanding of the world. So that is harm. And so when I was in my mid-20s and moved to New York City, lived in Brooklyn, I discovered the Brooklyn Public Library. And I likened my approach to reading at that point in my life to being like somebody who had been raised in a food desert and had suddenly been given abundance. I would go to the library every single weekend. I would scan the shelves for titles that looked interesting, pull them off the shelf, turn the book over, make sure the author, because looking at the author photo, looked at the author photo, made sure the person wasn't white. I didn't care what they were. They could be Indian, Black, Asian, didn't matter. As long as they weren't white, I'd take the book home. And it wasn't one book. I would be taking 5 and 6 books at a time home, devour them like the greedy reader I was, and just felt like I had experienced my own personal revolution, right? Because it felt like these books had been hidden from me. I felt like I had discovered a secret. I had discovered something that I just couldn't understand why I hadn't known before, that all these books by non-white authors existed. So honestly, for the next, I would say 15 years, that is how I made reparations to myself. I healed the wounds that I had created in myself in my poor assessment, my poor belief system about non-white authors. And I will confess that because of the amount of books that I read as a younger person, I doubted the veracity, the quality of books by Black authors and other authors of color. It took me a while before I shook loose that false assumption. And that is, to me, it feels shameful, and that feels like a terrible wrong. So that was how I decided that I had to change my reading habits. I had to repair the harm. I had to make reading reparations. I did the same thing for my children. The books that I purchased for my children, the books that I took out of the library for them, because I raised readers for sure, took them to the library every weekend, was to only purchase or take books out of the library by authors of color. Okay? So this became a very intentional act for me. I didn't think of it per se as reparations until I started thinking about this from a public standpoint. By this time, I had developed a level of influence as a journalist who wrote book reviews in places like the New York Times, the Washington Post, Entertainment Weekly. I had the ability to influence what other people would deem worthy literature. And so I made it a point to myself that I would never use my public platforms to highlight white authors, because it was important for me to make reparations to all of the authors that I had ignored growing up, to all of the authors I had supported growing up, all of the money I had spent on books growing up. Okay, so I thought, well, if I do have a way to make up for what I had done as a reader with my now public platforms, that's what I would do. Sorry about the nose itching. I have allergies. Sorry. Anyway, so the idea that I am making reparations for the harm that I have done for all of my past greedy reading habits, consuming all of those white authors. That's how I think of, again, from a personal perspective. But then if you look at the bigger picture, we still have a publishing industry in the United States that is overwhelmingly white dominated for literally since its inception. I mean, if you consider the publishing industry starting, when this country started, because people were even publishing before the colonies became the United States of America, but it's been predominantly white dominated. And I'm saying predominantly, I mean like 99% white. We are now, most recent figures that I know of were from 2022. The publishing industry is now 75% white dominated. So we are still in an uneven playing field. So by me using my public platforms to only spotlight or highlight authors of color, I am also attempting to make reparations that the publishing industry is falling way behind with, right? So my reading habits, the books that I love, the books that I talk about publicly are always books by BIPoC authors. That is my form of making reparations. So how do you incorporate this? How do you do the same thing? And do you need to do the same thing? Here's what you should consider. 1, have you spent a large amount of your time reading white? If the answer is yes, then you should consider that there has been harm done to you because you have not given yourself the opportunity to learn about the perspective, the stories, the historical precedents set or made by people who are not white. And we know the old African adage, proverb, that until the lion learns how to write, the story is always told by the hunter. Yeah, there's a lot of white hunters, people. So you have deprived yourself of hearing the lion stories if you have been predominantly reading white. And I know that there are a lot of people of color, because grown up in Europe or in the United States or the UK, who, by default have read white. Well, you consider the harm that has done for you, to you personally, and consider doing reading reparations, which is to say, I will henceforth, from now on, only read BIPoC authors so I can repair the harm I have done to myself by neglecting to learn, appreciate, and be entertained, quite frankly, by authors of color. On a public level, if you are a person who has influence in any way, and that influence could be, again, it could be social media influence, you could be a journalist, you could be the lady at your church who picks the book for book club, okay? You could be that person who makes recommendations at your children's school for, the books to read to the class, right? To your third graders. You can make reading reparations in a public way on that level as well, where you say, the publishing industry does such a good job promoting white authors. I'm going to do my part to make reparations by publicly promoting books by authors of color. Can you imagine the amount of, the sea change of what would happen if large amounts of white people, as well as other people of color, read, supported, and talked about majority books by BIPoC authors? That would be amazing. Another way you can make reading reparations, remember the definition says providing payment or other assistance. You can straight up write a check, Sheila, okay? You can straight up write a check and give that check to organizations that support BIPoC authors. For example, the Hurston Wright Foundation, which supports Black authors, the Asian American Writers Workshop, Latinx in Publishing. These organizations work, they're primarily not for profit. They support the development, mentorship, and celebration of BIPoC authors. And trust and believe, they could use some donations, okay? So that's another way that you, readers, can make reading reparations. You can make reparations. You can make amends for the wrong that is done to BIPoC authors globally by a publishing industry that still seems to think that whiteness is a precursor for better work. We know that white authors get paid better, like they get better book deals, larger book deals, I should say. They get more access, they get more support from the publishing industry. So any level of support to organizations that try to bridge that gap by supporting BIPoC authors would be a form of reading reparations. All right, so once again, just to sum up, I hope that I have convinced you that if you have been reading white your whole life, or majority white, that you might have some personal reparations to do for yourself. If you have been reading white and you have a public platform, even if you're writing reviews on Amazon or Goodreads, like even that makes a difference. And you could make a difference in saying, the only time I'm going to, the only reviews I'm going to write, the only public facing support I'm going to do is for BIPoC authors. That's reparations, honey. That's it. So think about first the harm that is done by you personally, to you personally, but also the harm that is done to BIPoC authors in aggregate because the publishing industry is overwhelmingly white and the readers support the authors that the publishing industry, highlights and profiles. And then also think about something as simple as making a donation to the organizations that support BIPoC authors. We're in a world right now, we're in a place right now where we're all looking for ways to make the world a better place, to fight back against what is happening in a world that seems to be hell-bent on banning books, dumbing down the population, suppressing the voices of BIPoC thinkers, writers, and authors. So this is a simple way that those of us who love to read can make a difference. I hope I've made you consider making some reading reparations. If you already do participate in your own form of reading reparations, tell me about it in the comments. Maybe you can inspire some other people to do the same thing in the way that you operate or you enforce reading reparations in your own life. All right, thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.